Welcome to our deep dive into the life of a woman. Well, you might not know her, but you absolutely should. Catherine von Bora. We're marking the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther. Yes.
Right.
Instead of focusing on the reformer himself, we're going behind the scenes, shining the spotlight on his wife.
Interesting.
Our source for this deep dive is an excerpt from 50 People Every Christian Should Know by Warren Wiersbe.
What I find so compelling is that, we often hear about the men who shaped history.
Yeah.
But what about the women standing right beside them?
Right.
Catherine's story is a perfect example. She wasn't just a passive figure in the background.
Right.
She was a force in her own right.
Okay, so let's paint the scene for our listener. It's the early 1500s, a time when the Catholic Church held immense power.
Yeah.
But this power structure was about to be challenged by a rebellious monk named Martin Luther. And right in the midst of this turmoil, we have Catherine von Bora, born in 1499. It's almost as if her life began with a premonition, the world as she knew it was about to change forever.
And what's striking is the path her life took.
Yeah.
At the tender age of 9, she was sent to a convent, dedicated to the very institution Luther was challenging.
Wow.
It really makes you wonder what she must have been thinking as a young girl.
Yeah.
Joining the convent just as Luther's movement began to gain momentum.
I mean, talk about conflicting destinies. Did those early years in the convent, immersed in the traditional structure of the church, shape her views on Luther's reforms?
Yeah.
Or did she always harbor a sense of questioning, a desire for something more? It's intriguing to consider how her early experiences may have influenced her later choices.
That's such an important question. And unfortunately, history often leaves those personal reflections unanswered.
Right.
What we do know is that convent life in those days could be incredibly restrictive, even oppressive at times. Some nuns sought escape. And Luther, as part of his reforms, believed in freeing those who felt trapped.
And Catherine was one of them. Her escape from the convent is the stuff of legends, worthy of its own movie.
I know.
A wagon loaded with herring barrels, a daring nighttime flight. It sounds more like a spy thriller than the life of a future reformer's wife.
Right.
I get this sense of urgency, this desperation to break free. It makes me wonder if the risks involved, the possibility of capture, or even worse, ever gave her pause.
It's a testament to their determination, both Catherine's and those who helped her.
Yeah.
Remember, defying the church in those days could have dire consequences.
Right.
It certainly wasn't a decision made lightly. It's a stark reminder of the courage it took to challenge the established order.
And what about Luther's role in all of this? We've heard about him helping nuns escape, but what motivated him? Was it purely ideological? A belief that these women were wrongly confined? Or was there a more personal, perhaps even compassionate element to his actions? I imagine it must have taken immense conviction to risk so much for others.
It's hard to say for certain, but based on what we know about Luther, I'd say it was likely a combination of factors. He saw the convent system as flawed, but he also had a deep sense of compassion for those suffering under it. And this compassion extended to Catherine even after her escape.
Oh, right. He tried to play matchmaker, find her a suitable husband.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting turn of events, considering he was a former monk himself.
Yeah, really.
It makes you wonder about his views on marriage at that point.
Yeah.
Was it purely practical, or did he see it as something more?
It's fascinating to consider, isn't it? And even more intriguing is Catherine's response.
Right.
She had her own ideas, her own agency.
Right.
And simply being presented with a potential husband wasn't enough for her.
Yeah.
She wasn't looking for just any marriage. She was looking for something more, something meaningful.
You're right. She was no damsel in distress waiting to be rescued and married off.
Yeah.
She had her own mind, her own will.
Absolutely.
Which makes their eventual marriage even more compelling. I mean, a former nun and the most controversial figure in Christendom talk about an unlikely pair.
Yeah.
What do you think? Was it love at first sight, a slow burn, or something else entirely?
That's the million-dollar question, and one that history doesn't give us a clear answer to, but we can speculate.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a shared passion for challenging the status quo, or perhaps a deep intellectual connection, or maybe, just maybe, it was a combination of all these things, a meeting of minds and hearts that defied all expectations. What do you think, listener?
It definitely sparks the imagination. And remember, Luther himself had reservations about marrying. It wasn't just about defying the church. There were real concerns at play.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was a marked man, declared a heretic.
Right.
He worried about putting Catherine in danger, especially with the constant threat of persecution. And let's not forget the financial realities.
Oh, right.
No book royalties for a heretic. He had a meager income,
Yeah.
a reputation for generosity, and now a wife to support. It wasn't exactly a fairy tale beginning.
It sounds like Catherine was stepping into a storm, both socially and financially.
Definitely.
It would have been easy to walk away, to choose a safer path.
Yeah.
But, as we'll see, she wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. What do you think? Was she drawn to Luther's ideals? His strength? Or is it something more personal?
It's a question worth pondering because in that moment, Catherine made a choice that would shape not only her life, but also, in many ways, the course of history.
We left off with Catherine choosing to marry Luther, a choice that was both brave and, let's be honest, a bit risky.
Huh.
But before we delve into their married life, I'd love to hear more about that escape from the convent. The whole herring barrel scheme is so cinematic, I keep picturing it in my head.
It's an incredible story, isn't it? And it really underscores the bravery of everyone involved, not just Catherine. The merchant and his nephew who orchestrated the escape. I mean, they were risking their lives to help these women. Imagine the consequences if they had been caught.
Absolutely. It really puts Luther's actions into perspective. He wasn't just writing theological treatises. He was actively challenging the authority of the church, putting his neck on the line for something he believed in.
And it wasn't just about freeing these women physically. It was about offering them a choice, a chance to live a life free from the restrictions they faced. For some nuns, it was about finding a different path, a path that aligned with their own beliefs and aspirations.
It's a stark reminder that even institutions with the best intentions can sometimes become instruments of control, even oppression, and it's a lesson that resonates even today. But after that daring escape, Catherine found herself in Wittenberg, a world away from the cloistered life she knew. What was that transition like for her?
Well, imagine going from a life of prayer and contemplation to suddenly, navigating the complexities of a bustling town, interacting with scholars and reformers, learning the practical skills needed to run a household. It must have been a whirlwind experience for her.
It's like a crash course in real life after years of living in a very structured environment. Do we know how she adapted to these dramatic changes?
We can glean some insights from historical accounts. It seems Catherine was a quick study. She learned to manage a household, becoming adept at everything from cooking and cleaning to budgeting and entertaining. And let's not forget about that piggery she started. Talk about resourcefulness.
That's right, the piggery. It seems so incongruous with the image we often have of a reformer's wife. It's just a very practical, down-to-earth side to her personality. What do you think, listener? Does that surprise you?
It certainly adds another dimension to her character, doesn't it? And it also reminds us that Catherine wasn't just content to be Luther's wife. She had her own ambitions, her own drive to contribute in tangible ways.
And remember, she was doing all of this while navigating the social complexities of being married to Martin Luther, a man who was constantly in the spotlight, often embroiled in controversy. It makes you wonder how she balanced her own identity with the demands of being Luther's wife.
That's a great question. It suggests a certain strength of character, an ability to carve out her own space, even amidst the chaos that often surrounded Luther. And perhaps a sense of humor played a role as well. Imagine the patience and wit it would have taken to manage a household with someone as intense as Martin Luther.
Right. Remember those stories about their dinner table conversations, the table talk? It's fascinating to think of the dynamics at play. Luther, the intellectual giant, lost in theological debate, while Catherine tries to steer the conversation back to more earthly matters.
It paints a vivid picture, doesn't it? And it highlights the contrasting personalities at play. Luther, the passionate reformer, grappling with abstract concepts, and Catherine, the grounded homemaker, focused on the practicalities of daily life. It must have made for some interesting dinner conversations, to say the least.
And yet, despite their differences, they managed to build a life together, a partnership that endured through challenges and triumphs. What do you think? Was it their shared commitment to reform that bound them together, or something deeper?
Perhaps it was a combination of factors. A shared purpose, a deep respect for each other's strengths, and maybe even a touch of that opposites attract dynamic. Whatever the secret ingredient, their relationship seems to have been a source of strength and support for both of them.
And that support was likely crucial, especially given the trials they faced. They lost several children, both struggled with health issues, and Luther, as we know, was a lightning rod for controversy.
Absolutely. Their lives were far from easy, and yet, amidst the storms, their bond seems to have grown stronger. There's a story about Catherine that I find particularly insightful. It reveals a lot about her character. Apparently, one morning during family devotions, Luther was reading from Genesis 22, the story of Abraham being commanded by God to sacrifice his son Isaac. Catherine, upon hearing this, was utterly shocked. "I don't believe it," she exclaimed. "God wouldn't have treated his son like that."
Wow. Talk about a bold statement. It's not every day that you hear someone challenging a biblical narrative, especially in that era. What was Luther's reaction?
Well, according to the story, Luther, in his typical fashion, simply replied, "But Katie, he did."
I can only imagine the tension in the room. Did Catherine back down, or did she push back against Luther's interpretation?
It's hard to say for certain, but the fact that the story was recorded suggests that it was seen as a significant moment, a glimpse into the dynamics of their relationship. It suggests that Catherine wasn't afraid to voice her own opinions, even when they differed from her husband's. And it also highlights her compassion, her inability to fathom a God who would demand such a sacrifice.
It makes her seem very human, relatable. She's not just a historical figure. She's a woman wrestling with complex theological concepts, struggling to reconcile her faith with the difficult stories of the Bible.
And that human side is what makes her story so compelling. She's not just a footnote in Luther's narrative. She is a complex individual with her own thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. And speaking of her human side, there's another story that really highlights Catherine's quick wit and her ability to handle Luther's moods. Have you heard this one?
I'm all ears.
Well, apparently Luther was going through a particularly difficult period. He was carrying a lot of burdens, fighting many battles, and was unusually depressed and withdrawn. Catherine, being the perceptive woman she was, decided to take matters into her own hands. One day, she met him at the door wearing a black mourning dress.
Wow, talk about a dramatic entrance. I can only imagine Luther's reaction.
He was taken aback, to say the least. "Who died?" he asked, obviously concerned. And Catherine, with perfect comedic timing, replied, "God."
That's brilliant. Did she really say that?
That's how the story goes. And Luther, initially shocked, responded with something like, "You foolish thing, why this foolishness?" But Catherine, undeterred, persisted. "It's true," she said. "God must have died, or Dr. Luther wouldn't be so sorrowful."
I love her audacity. What a clever way to address the elephant in the room.
It was. And you know what? It worked. Her unconventional therapy, her willingness to use humor to address a serious issue, snapped Luther out of his depression. It's a testament to their unique bond and to Catherine's deep understanding of her husband.
It also speaks to her resourcefulness and her willingness to think outside the box. She wasn't afraid to challenge Luther, to use humor and wit to help him see things differently.
Exactly. It adds another layer to her personality. We see her not just as the capable housewife and devoted wife, but also as a woman with a sharp mind and a playful spirit. It's a reminder that even amidst the seriousness of religious reform and historical upheaval, there's still room for laughter and lightheartedness.
It's a beautiful reminder, and one that we could all benefit from. It seems like we've only scratched the surface of Catherine's story. There's so much more to explore, especially when it comes to her legacy. But for now, we'll have to take a pause. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll delve into Catherine's lasting impact and the lessons we can learn from her remarkable life. Welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Catherine von Bora. So far, we've uncovered a woman of remarkable resilience, wit, and depth. But what about her lasting impact? How should we remember Catherine von Bora?
It's tempting to view her simply as Luther's wife, relegating her to a footnote in history. But that would be a disservice to her multifaceted character. Catherine's influence goes far beyond that limited role.
You're right. We've already discussed how she transformed the Black Cloister, turning it from a quiet monastery into a vibrant center of activity. It wasn't just a home. It was a hub for scholars, students, and guests, all drawn to the energy and intellectual ferment of the Luther household.
Exactly. And she wasn't just providing food and lodging. She was fostering a sense of community, creating a space where ideas could be exchanged and debated. It's a testament to her management skills and her ability to create a welcoming and stimulating environment.
And let's not forget her role in managing their finances, which, as we've discussed, were often precarious. It's fascinating to consider the former nun overseeing their household budget, even running a piggery to supplement their income.
It speaks volumes about her practicality and resourcefulness. Remember, this was a time when women's roles were largely confined to the domestic sphere. Yet, Catherine was breaking boundaries, demonstrating her business acumen and her willingness to contribute in tangible ways.
I wonder, listener, what comes to mind when you picture Catherine? Do you see her as a quiet figure in the background, or as the dynamic, capable woman we're discovering through this deep dive?
It's an important question to ask ourselves. How often do we overlook the contributions of those who work behind the scenes?
Right.
Particularly women whose stories are often marginalized or minimized. Catherine's story challenges us to rethink those assumptions, to recognize the multifaceted roles that women have always played in shaping history.
Absolutely. And her impact wasn't limited to the practical realm. Think about the emotional support she provided to Luther, a man who was constantly under pressure, facing criticism and threats. Her strength, her wit, her ability to ground him, those qualities were undoubtedly essential to his ability to carry on his work.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how the course of the Reformation might have been different without Catherine by Luther's side.
Yeah.
Her unwavering belief in him, her ability to provide a haven amidst the storms, those were invaluable contributions.
And her legacy extends beyond her direct influence on Luther. Think about the example she set for other women. Here was a woman who challenged societal norms, who stepped outside the boundaries of what was considered acceptable for women at that time. She managed a household, ran a business, and played a significant role in supporting one of the most influential movements of her era.
Her story reminds us that even in the face of societal constraints, individuals can make a difference, and that impact can ripple outward, inspiring others to challenge limitations and pursue their own passions.
It's inspiring to think about how much she achieved in a time when women were often denied opportunities for leadership and influence. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways for our listener? What can we learn from Catherine von Bora's extraordinary life?
I think her story offers several valuable lessons. It encourages us to look beyond the surface, to seek out the stories of those who are often overlooked or overshadowed. It challenges us to recognize the multifaceted contributions of women throughout history, not just the ones that fit neatly into traditional narratives. And it reminds us that even in the face of adversity, individuals have the power to shape their own destinies and leave a lasting impact on the world.
Beautifully said. Catherine von Bora may have lived centuries ago, but her story is timeless. She was a woman of strength, faith, and action, and her legacy continues to inspire, challenging us to look beyond the familiar narratives and discover the hidden figures who have shaped our world.
And perhaps her story will inspire you, listener, to delve deeper into the lives of those history has often overlooked. You might be surprised by what you discover.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the remarkable life of Catherine von Bora. We'll see you on our next adventure into the depths of history.